Hi everybody, my name is Terrance Wong. I'm from Home Sweet Home. So we are starting a new series of edu-infocational videos for all our viewers out there to understand and to experience and to learn and to educate ourselves about what this whole property industry is all about. So for our first topic of the day, we'd like to talk about aging HDB flats and how it might impact the value of your aging HDB property. So, aging HDB flats, what is it all about? 80% of Singaporean homeowners, they all live in HDB flats. Every year, HDB publishes an index of the value of your HDB property, and it goes up, it goes down. In the last 2 years during COVID, it has gone up by about 10%. But have you ever wondered, what is the breakdown of the flats in Singapore? Are you an old flat? Are you a new flat? Are you a middle-aged flat? And how exactly do the characteristics of each flat affect the value of a property? Which one goes up more? Which one goes up less? And what happens in supply and demand when the supply and demand situation changes? So we are here to explore. We have done some data and number crunching, and today we are here to present to you 3 critical reasons on why you might want to consider perhaps selling or doing something about your aging HDB flat. So, critical reason number 1. Do you know, or from our data that we have crunched from HDB's publicly available numbers, the number of aging HDB flats, which we would like to classify as about 50 years lease and below, was set to double. Yes, and I'm telling you, it's set to double in the next 10 years or so. Why is this so? HDB publishes an annual report. In this annual report, it gives the breakdown of the number of flats that they built for every 5 years. From this data, we basically number crunched it and we did a cumulative graph, and we added all the number of flats together, and we see that, what is the total number of flats that HDB has built all the way from inception in 1960 all the way until the year 2020. In all, HDB has built 1,222,000, about their number of flats. When we added together cumulatively, as of today, 1920 or 1922, the number of flats that are basically 50 years lease of less, they have to be built in the year 1971-75. And these make up 20% of the total number of HDB flats that HDB has built. In a nutshell, 2 out of 10 flats, I repeat, 2 out of 10 flats are 50 years lease and below in the year 2022. But here's the kicker. Fast forward 10 years later, the number of flats that are 50 years or less increases all the way to 47%. AKA, or i.e., in 10 years' time, the number of flats that are aging, defined again, 50 years and below, would increase from 2 out of 10 to about 5 out of 10. What does this mean? It means that your competition is essentially set to double by 2.5 times. If you're the owner of a 60 years lease flat now, in 10 years time your flat will be 50 years, you will be 1 out of the 5 out of 10 flats that are 50 years and below. Why is this so? Why is this so special? Because in the year from 1981 to 1985, that's when HDB was its most populous. They built a total of 189,000 during that spread. So this was the strongest or the most industrial years in Singapore, and HDB was ramping up production. It also means that it occupies the largest chunk of flats in terms of its chronological age. So there will set to be a huge demand increase in aging HDB flats, defined 50 years as below in the next 10 years. What does this mean for the value of property? Supply and demand economics. When your supply increases by 2.5 times, what will likely happen to the value of your property? Will it appreciate? Will it depreciate? Or will it depreciate quite drastically? We leave that to you. Critical reason number 2 for why you might want to consider selling your HDB flat. Reason number 2, the lack of financing for aging flats can potentially lead to a greater than 33% reduction in the total number of potential buyers for your property. What do I mean by that? Essentially, for example, if there are 10 eligible buyers for your property, if your flat was new, but because your flat is old, this number of buyers from 10 will be reduced to potentially at least about only 6. What does this mean? It means less demand. Will the price rise or the price fall? Obviously the price will fall. And why is it that there will be a lack of financing? All right. So if you buy a new, for example, 5-room flat that's worth about 800,000 and it's a fresh 90+ year lease, there are no loan limitations to it. If you are a young couple or if you are 30 years of age, very simply, how much do you need to buy a flat? What is the amount of money that you need in your pocket? You need equity and loan. Equity is the amount of cash and CPF that you need to dump into it. 15% minimally if you're taking a HDB loan. 15% of 800,000 is about 160,000. It means, for example, in the hypothetical situation where you're buying an $800,000 4 or 5-room newish lease HDB flat, you only need 160,000 in cash and CPF and 640,000 in loan. Now, throw back in time. Imagine when you're 30 years old and you're just starting out your career. 160,000 possible? Yeah, of course, right? You know, your husband has saved up 80,000, you have saved up 80,000. It is perfectly affordable to be able to buy an 800,000 HDB property. However, if you say, I want to buy an old HDB property, perhaps I like the old style of the point blocks, you know, the 4-point block configurations that are very popular in the 5-room flats that were built a lot in the 1970s. They can be found in places like a lot of established new towns, established HDB townships like Bedok, Clementi, Dover, Queenstown, etc. Those have about 58 years lease left currently. Still no problem to buy, all right? Yes, some limitations, but what happens 10 years later? All these flats, the lease will drop to 50. Affordability when there's 50. What are the loan limitations when your flat is 50 years and a younger buyer wants to buy from you next time when you are going to sell? So, typical buyer, 30 years. To buy a 50-year lease, there is a HDB calculator available online that you can punch in the numbers, all right, to see what are the limitations on the HDB loan that HDB is willing to grant to you. When you punch in the numbers, you look like, whoa, golly, man. Wait a minute here. Hold your horses. There is an issue. Punch in the numbers. A buyer or a pair of buyers that are 30 years old, in order to buy an $800,000 house, HDB isn't going to lend you $640,000. They will only lend you $455,000 because HDB thinks, oh, okay, your flat is going to be old, and they prorate the amount of loan that they give to you. So if you can only loan $455,000, where's the rest going to come from? It's going to come from your pocket, man. Which means, same scenario, buyer 30 years old, but buying a 50-year-old lease HDB flat needs now $365,000 in cash to buy the property. He can only take $455,000 in loan. Now tell me, how many 30-year-old buyers just at the start of their career will be able to save $365,000 in cash and CPF in order to afford your aging HDB flat? Very little. So there's a real issue here. So in our analysis, we find that HDB buyers, in general, they run the gamut of across the spectrum of all ages, 25 to 30, 35 to 40, 45 to 50, and maybe 55. So there are 3 decades basically that you can buy from: 25, 30, 35 to 40, 45, 55. For aging flats, 25 to 30 is definitely eliminated. All these young buyers who are 25 to 30 of age and even the low 30s of age will not be able to afford your aging HDB flat priced at $800,000 because simply they do not have $365,000 in cash and CPF to cough up to buy your house. If they go for a new lease, 90+ years, no problem. They only need $160,000. They can borrow the rest in cash. So, from our experience, a lot of buyers do not have problems taking the loan. They will have problems with the upfront equity amount. What does that mean? 25, eliminated. 30-year-old buyers, eliminated. 35, possibly also eliminated, actually. Which means that at least potentially 1/3 or 30% of your buyers potential buyers will be eliminated from buying a HDB flat versus a newish flat if they buy. What does it mean? They will all veer towards buying the old ones. Oh, sorry, the new ones, okay? The new flats. And your aging flat will suffer from a drop in demand. I want to talk a bit about private loan financing because besides the HDB where you can go to them to take a loan from, obviously you can go to the private banks or the local banks in order to get a loan for your property. But do you know there's a little known rule where the banks will only issue you a loan tenure of up to maximum where at the end of the loan there's at least still 30 years left to the lease. What does it mean? If you have a 60 years lease left property, they will still issue you a maximum lease of 25 years. For HDBs in Singapore, the maximum loan tenure to be granted to you, regardless of your age, is 25 years. It doesn't matter whether you're 20 and you can stretch it to 65. They won't give you a 45 years, they'll give you a 25 years lease maximum only. So, if you're 60, no problem, because 60 minus 25, you still have 35 years. Now, this issue drops or becomes an issue when the lease tenure drops. So, if your lease tenure is left with 50 years, they won't give you a 25-year lease. They only give you a 20-year lease. And what does it mean? That means your monthly mortgage or your monthly income required to borrow the amount increases. So, imagine if you are only 30 years, theoretically, you can rent up to 65, you can take a maximum 25, but no, because it's an aging flat. And let's say your flat is left with 50 years lease only, and you're trying to sell, and this young buyer comes. He needs an income of 11.6 thousand because he can only take a 20-year lease. Now imagine if this young couple buys it from you, and then he tries to sell it 5 years later at MOP, 45 years. That's where the game really changes. When he tries to sell it next, all right, the next couple that buys it from him will require an income of 14.3K per month. It goes up substantially. Why? Because now the maximum loan tenure is 15 years because the lease is now 45 years. Imagine now if you're an owner that says, hey, yeah, my flat is 50 years, no problem. I'm going to stay in here for life, I'm a lifer, No problem, I'm going to pass away in it, I'll just live it. However, if your circumstances change, and they do change, because you retire, you run out of money, your savings drop, your RA only gives you perhaps $500 to $800 per month, and it's not enough, and you need to cash out, potentially, let's say 10 years later, there is no liquidity. Again, I repeat, there is very little liquidity when your flat drops from 50 years to 40 years. Why? Because in the private loan arena now, the next buyer can only take a loan tenure of 10 years. And this equates to the buyer requiring 19.7K per month, all right, to buy your 40 years lease. Hit that again, 19.7K, they got to earn about 20,000 a month in order to buy your 40 years lease property left. If they could earn 20,000 a month, they would definitely have a lot of options on their plate, and they could buy a private, So again, many issues, right? As your flat drops, the private loan amount increases required to buy your property because your loan tenure shortens drastically. The basic tenet is the bank will only lend you up to a lease period where at the end of the lease there's still 30 years left. So if you've got 50 years, they'll lend you 20 years. If you've got 45 years, they'll lend you 15 years. If you've got 40 years, they'll lend you 10 years. So this is a problem because the income really goes up substantially. Now, the HDB index, if we analyze it from the year 2000 and 2013 to 2019, everybody knows HDB flat values dropped in Singapore. Before that, in 2012 and 13, there were COVs of like 50, 60, 70,000. It was common. But from 2013 to 2019, because there was an oversupply of flats, the value of the flats dropped. The index in 2013 was about 140-ish. By 2019, it was about 130-ish. So there was a drop of about 10+%. But different flats or different lease values behave differently. We broke it down. We picked a particular area in Singapore, and because big data is available on a sporadic block-by-block basis, so we decided to look at the Central West area, Queenstown, Clementi, in order to see how the behavior of the flat changes over this period of time based on their lease. So for a new lease flat, we took block 48 Strathmore Avenue. The current lease left is 83 years. 10 years ago, it was a newish flat. It TOP in 2006. 10 years ago, that will be 2013. It still had about 93 years lease left. When we compile or we use, again, thanks to the people from Square Foot H4 Property, because with the big data available on Square Foot, we could zoom in on a block basis and they could compile all the data based on that 4-room flat basis. You could sort it out by, you could limit it by square footage, and we came up with a graph, or they produced the graph to show, and it's on the screen right now. And we could see that for this newish 93 years lease left flat in the year 2013, actually the flat value increased. Block 48, Strathmore Avenue, lease left 93, did not drop in price when the overall index dropped in price about 10+%. It actually had a slight increase as shown on the graph here. Now, the next one. We needed to pick a flat with about 80+ years lease left. And we picked Clementi Block 459. The current lease left is 79, 2022. 10 years ago, it was about 80-ish. Again, thanks to the guys from Square Foot, when we compiled the data, the number was about flat. So that gave us an indication that if the leases were about 80+ years lease left during this period where the whole index dropped 10+%, it outperformed the index. It was actually flat. So newish leases outperformed the index. When they had 90+ years lease left, there was an increase. When there was 80+ years lease left, it was flat. How about the older flats then? For the older flats, we wanted to pick now one left with 60 over years, and we picked Clementi Block 415. Of special mention in my heart because I grew up on that block, and that's why I actually picked it up. Okay, so when we took the data and we look at it, oh by golly man, it actually dropped about 20%. The lease left for Block 415 Clementi is 55 years lease left. 10 years ago, it was 65 years. You can still sell it, no problem. It hasn't reached that threshold limit or the danger zone of about 60 years, 65 years, all right? But still, during that period, when people sold, they had to accept a lower price, and the price drop was about 20% as shown on the chart. The last category we want to show is the oldest flats in Singapore. Now, oldest flats in Singapore, the lease is about 40 over left. 10 years ago, there'll be about 50 over years left. And we picked the example of Commonwealth Crescent, Block 96. In Commonwealth, there are a lot of old flats. They are all 3 rooms, and they give a good example of an aging flat. So 10 years ago, Block 96, Commonwealth Crescent in Queenstown, it had about 57 years lease. And it suffered the biggest drop in value in this index. It dropped by a whopping 23% during this period of 2013 and 2019. It underperformed the index. Now the index only dropped from about 143 to about 130-ish. So that's about 10%. But the aging flats, Commonwealth Crescent, 55 years lease, it dropped by a whooping 23%. If the flat was about 60+ years lease left, it dropped slightly better, but still underperformed the index, and it dropped by about 20%. So in a nutshell, what am I trying to say? I'm trying to tell you that the index is made up of a whole range of flats of different lease tenures, and they all perform at a different rate. The new flats maintain the value well, and the newest flats even increase in price. The older ones have much steeper drops in price and actually underperform the index. Now, if you think about it, this is totally logical, right? If you can afford to buy a new lease, you would definitely buy a new lease flat because every Singaporean intrinsically knows that the cycle is a curve. When the lease drops to 0, boom, there is no more value, 0. But in the early parts of the lease, the flat value does increase. It's a parabolic curve, and there's a turning point somewhere. So demand is always skewed to the new ones. If people can afford it, they will always buy the newer ones. And the older ones, therefore, suffer from a lack in demand, and prices will drop. Especially in times where supply is strong. And that's where there's more supply and there's lesser buyers and values drop. Now, in this current COVID situation, prices have increased. Why is that? Because due to the construction delays, due to COVID, BTO delays, a lot of the BTO buyers have flooded back into the resale secondary market, and they're just snapping up because they can't afford to wait. COVID delayed 2 years, subscribe to a BTO another 5 years. Altogether, you want to wait 10 years, it's a long time to wait. They want it now. There's immediacy to property, right? You just got married, you just want to get your own property so you can start a life. If they can't get it from the primary market, they will go to the secondary market, which is why flats of all ages now are enjoying a resurgence in value. Good time to sell? Perhaps. I leave you to think about it. Alright guys, great. So to summarize on today, 3 critical reasons why you might want to consider selling your aging HDB flat. So critical reason number 1, the number of aging flats is set to increase by at least 100% within the next 10 years. Critical reason number 2, the lack of financing for aging HDB flats will cause at least 1/3 of your buyers to drop out as compared to a new HDB flat. Critical reason number 3, aging HDB flats suffer from a greater decrease in the value of their properties as opposed to new HDB flats. Alright guys, thank you for listening and thank you for watching. My name is Terrance Wong from Home Sweet Home. If you like what you see, smash the like button, smash the subscribe button, and I hope you follow us. And if you like more content like that, feel free to drop us a holler, perhaps about any topics that you like or is dear to your heart, and we'll do the analysis for you. Critical reason number 1. What am I trying to say? Shit.